Lightning struck me and left me with a secret power I hid for years. Lightning hit me on a fishing dock when I was 19, and I woke up in a hospital 2 days later with a scar on my shoulder shaped like a branch. The doctor said my heart was fine and my brain was fine, and they sent me home. But I was not the same, and it took me a while to work out how. It started with clocks. I would look at a dead battery clock on the wall, and it would tick once while I watched it, then stop again the second I looked away. Then it was streetlights. I would walk under one that was out, and it would flicker on over my head and go dark a few steps later. My phone charged faster in my hand than on the charger. A dead flashlight in a drawer would glow the second I picked it up. I did not tell anybody, because there was no way to say it out loud that did not sound crazy. I just knew, quietly, that the lightning had left something in me, so I learned to hide it. I stopped wearing watches because they ran fast on my wrist. I kept my hands off other people's phones. I tested it a few times, alone, with the door shut, holding a dead battery in my palm until it warmed up and went good again. It never lasted long, and it left me tired and hungry after, like I had lent the thing a piece of myself to run on. So I stopped playing with it. It was better to leave it alone than to poke at something I did not understand, and I told myself I would never need it anyway. I was wrong about that. 4 years later, I was working late shifts at a small grocery store, stocking shelves after closing. It was me, an older man named Gene, who ran the register, and Annabelle, the manager. The owner was a man named Malik, who came in most days and knew every inch of that building down to the screws. One night, a bad storm rolled in while we were closing, the kind that knocks the power out, and it did. The whole store went black. Annabelle had clocked out not long before. It was just Gene and me, and the front doors locked with a magnet, an electric lock, the kind that seals shut when the power dies and needs current to open again. We were locked in. Gene was not doing well. He had a heart condition, he told me, and he had left his pills at home. And the dark and the heat and the fear got to him. And about 20 minutes in, he sat down hard on the floor by the registers and said he could not get a good breath. I banged on the doors. I yelled. Nobody was out in that storm to hear me. The phones had no signal, the towers down with everything else. Gene was getting worse, gray and slow, and I knew he did not have long to sit in a hot, dark store waiting for a truck to come fix a line. So I did the thing I had spent 4 years hiding. I went to the door where the electric lock was, the big metal plate that held it shut, and I put both hands flat on it. I did not know if it would work. I had only ever made small, dead things flicker. I closed my eyes and I pushed, the way you push when you are trying to remember a word, and I felt that old buzz climb up out of my shoulder and down my arms and into the metal. The lock hummed. It got warm under my palms. Then it clicked. One clean click, and the door swung open into the rain. I got Gene up and out into the wet air and flagged down the first car that came by, and they got him to the hospital in time. He lived. The doctor said another half hour in that heat with his heart, and he would not have. Here is the part I did not expect. The next day, Malik wanted to know how we got out because the lock was electric, and the power had been dead for hours, and the door log showed it opened at a time when there was no current anywhere on the block. Gene told him I opened it. Malik asked me how. I said the door must have failed open in the storm. He did not believe that, because that lock fails shut. That is the entire point of it. And he had the paperwork to prove it only opens with power. He kept at me for days. A new question every shift, calm and polite, and never twice the same way. I kept my answers short and boring. The storm must have done something to the wiring, but I could feel him watching me differently now, like I was a lock he was working on. Gene came back 3 days later like nothing had happened, but every time he passed me in the aisle, he gave me a look that was not scared, it was grateful, and that was almost worse, because grateful people talk. A week in, Malik brought a locksmith and an electrician to go over the door. I stocked canned goods on the far side of the store and kept my head down. Later that afternoon, I was in the back sorting a delivery when Malik walked past on his phone with the office door half open, and I heard the electrician clear as anything on speaker. This lock cannot open without current, period. There is no storm surge where it just pops. My hand stopped moving on the box I was holding. Malik said, "Thank you. I appreciate you looking into it." Real calm, real polite, and hung up. A couple seconds later, his chair pushed back, and when I looked up, he was standing in the doorway of his office, looking at me across the store floor. Not angry, not confused, just looking, the way a man looks at a math problem he is close to solving. After that, I started avoiding him, taking my break early when his car was in the lot, vanishing into the stockroom when I heard him come in the back. He caught it in 3 days. He stepped around an end cap and stood in my path with his arms crossed. "You used to eat lunch at the counter," he said. "Now you disappear every time I walk in." I said the back was quieter. He nodded once and walked away without pushing, and me, knowing that he knew, made it 10 times worse. That night, the scar was itching, the branch of it running from my collarbone down my arm, burning the way it did whenever I was cornered. I had not tested myself in months. I pulled a burned-out bulb from the drawer by the stove, sat down at the dining table, and pushed. The buzz came the same as always, shoulder to chest to palms. But it was stronger. The bulb did not flicker. It lit up bright white, so bright I could see it through my closed eyelids, and it held 1 second, 2, 3 full seconds of clean light pouring out of a dead bulb in my bare hands. Then it went out, and the room tilted, and I grabbed the table edge to keep from going off the chair. My nose was bleeding, a thin line of red down onto my shirt. 3 seconds. The old stuff had been half a second at most. It was growing, and I did not know where it stopped, and that scared me worse than Malik did. The next morning, there was a small black camera mounted above the front door with a red light on the side. It was not pointed at the entrance where customers come in. It was pointed down at the lock panel, the exact square foot where I had put my hands. Malik came up behind me with his keys. "Just a security upgrade," he said. "Nothing to worry about." He went into his office, and I stood there looking at that red light and knew it was not an upgrade. It was a trap, patient and quiet and carefully placed, built by a man who had been lied to once before and had promised himself he would never be again. Wednesday closing shift. Gene and I were the last ones in. He asked me to help carry 2 boxes of overstock out to his car, which was not a weird request. He was in his 60s. We set them in his trunk, and then he did not close it. He leaned against the car and looked at the ground, and I waited because rushing Gene never got you anywhere. Finally, he looked up. up, and his face was raw and honest and a little scared. "I was dying in there," he said. "You know that." I felt my heart slowing down. I was counting breaths. I got to a point where I was thinking about my daughter and whether she would know I tried to hold on. And then you opened a door that does not open. My mouth went dry. I started to say the thing about the storm and the wiring, and he held up a slow, firm palm. "Don't," he said. I was 10 feet away. "I heard you put your hands on that panel." I heard it hum. Storms don't hum like that. I did not say yes, and I did not say no. I stood there with my hands at my sides, and I think my silence told him everything a yes would have. He nodded to himself, like he was checking something off a list he had carried for weeks. "I'm not going to tell anybody," he said. "You saved my life. Whatever that was, it is yours. But I needed you to know that I know." The relief hit so hard my knees went loose. Then the fear came right behind it, cold and sharp, because someone knowing means someone can talk. "Why tell me now?" I asked. Gene rubbed the back of his neck. "Because Malik called me into the office today and asked me to watch you during your shifts and report back." That landed like a punch I did not see coming. He was not just asking questions anymore. He was turning people into eyes. "I told him I would do it," Gene said. I stared at him. "You what?" "I told him yes," Gene said. "Because if I said no, he would start wondering what I was protecting and why." Then that tired half smile crossed his face. "So now I'm your lookout. Not exactly how I plan to spend my 60s. I almost laughed. This old man with a bad heart that I had dragged out of a dark store was volunteering to be my early warning system against his own boss. I did not deserve it, and I took it anyway. For a few days, it actually worked. If Malik's car was in the lot, Gene would walk past and say something about rotating the end caps, which meant hands in your pockets and stay away from anything plugged in. I stopped touching electronics at work entirely and kept my hands in my jacket until my fingers went stiff, and I let myself believe it might blow over. I should have known better. Thursday afternoon, I heard voices at the front and leaned around the end of aisle 6. Malik was standing at the door with a man in work boots and a company polo, crouched at the lock panel with a tool bag open beside him. Another expert, in person this time, during my shift, where I had to watch it happen. The man pulled the cover off and went over the metal plate with a small flashlight and scraped at something. Then he stood up and called Malik over, and his voice carried just far enough. "See these marks? Something heated this panel from the outside. These are not tool marks. This is thermal damage, like someone ran a current through it by hand." The store was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator case 3 aisles away. Malik looked at the marks. Then his eyes came up and swept the floor and found me standing there with a pricing gun in one hand and nothing in the other. He did not say a word. He just looked at me the way a man looks when the last piece slides into place and the picture is exactly what he thought it would be. Then he thanked the expert and walked him out to the lot, calm as anything, and that was worse than if he had yelled. That night I called Gene and told him I had an idea he was not going to like. The plan was to hand Malik an explanation so boring it would kill every question he had left. And I would tell him that the night of the storm, I had a portable jump starter in my jacket, the kind people use on car batteries, and that I panicked and held it against the panel and prayed, and never mentioned it because I felt dumb. It was a lie, but it was the right kind, small and human and embarrassing, and nobody invents a story that makes them look like a clueless kid pressing a battery box against a door. Better than that, it explained the thermal marks, because a jump starter pushes a lot of current into a small place fast. So the morning before my shift, I drove to a hardware store 20 minutes out and bought one for $60, a black plastic brick the size of a thick paperback. I showed it to Gene in the back aisle. He turned it over, pressed the button, and grinned for the first time in weeks. "That is actually smart," he said, keeping his voice low. "Stupid enough to be true. He'll buy that." I should have walked straight into that office. Instead, I waited for Malik to have his coffee, for a slow stretch, for the right moment, and while I was waiting, the whole thing fell apart. Unable came in at noon and found me in aisle 3 by the bread rack. I had not thought about him once in any of this because he had gone home before the power even went out. He crossed his arms and looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not angry, not mean, just serious enough to make the back of my neck prickle. "Malik told me about the lock thing," he said. "Okay," I said, like I was not sure what he meant. He did not buy the confused act for a second. "I went back and checked the timestamps," he said. "I clocked out at 9:14. The power went out at 9:31. The door log shows it opened at 10:47. That is over an hour with no current." He let that sit, and I could feel that $60 brick in my pocket like it weighed 100 pounds. "No battery pack opens a magnetic fail-secure lock," Annabelle said. I looked it up. The floor tilted under me. He had already done the homework I was praying nobody would do. The cover story I spent 2 days building was dead before I ever told it. "I don't really know how locks work," I said, and heard how weak it sounded coming out. Annabelle shook his head, not in a mean way, more like he felt bad for me. "I'm not trying to get you in trouble," he said, quieter now. "But Malik is talking about pulling the footage off that new camera and rewinding it to see if anything else has happened near that panel. If you have something going on, you need to get in front of it." The warning was worse than an accusation because it meant even the people not out to get me could see the numbers did not add up. He patted my shoulder once and walked to the back office. I stood there with a loaf of bread in my hand and absolutely nothing left. After that, Malik stopped asking and started testing. A silver flashlight appeared on the counter near my station one morning, switched on with dead batteries in it, said exactly where my hand would go to move it out of the way. I did not touch it. The next day, a round white wall clock went up over the section where I stocked, and when nobody was around, I checked the back and the battery slot was empty. He was laying dead things in my path the way a man lays traps for an animal he has never actually seen. Suspicious is when you think something might be wrong. Malik was not suspicious anymore. He was convinced, and he just wanted it on camera. I walked that store like a man trying not to leave footprints. 2 days later, Annabelle found me in the break room and sat down at the little table with his hands flat on it. "I do not know what is going on with you, and honestly, I do not want to know," he said. "But Malik is starting to talk to me about whether we let you go, not your work. Your work is fine. He says he cannot trust someone who will not tell him the truth about what happened in his building, and he cannot run a business with that hanging over him." He stood up and pushed the chair in. "You have maybe a week." A week was 5 shifts. 5 shifts of the camera and the dead flashlight and the dead clock and my hands in my pockets. Gene found me at the dairy case 20 minutes later and read it off my face without asking and tilted his head toward the stockroom. He stopped between two tall racks of overstock and turned to face me. You might have to tell him, Jean said. No lead up, the way he said everything. Not all of it, but something real. Something he can hold on to that is not another story about storms and battery packs. His voice was the calmest I had heard it in weeks. Because right now, you are losing this. Every day you stay quiet, he digs deeper. And the deeper he digs, the worse it gets when he hits the bottom. The only thing you have left is the truth. I worked the whole next shift without a word to Malik. I needed the customers gone and the doors locked, so whatever I said stayed inside that building. Around 9:30, Jean flipped the sign, and I stood in aisle 2 breathing until the scar stopped burning long enough for me to walk. Malik was at his desk with a stack of receipts and a calculator. Can I talk to you? I said. Private? Something shifted in his face. Not surprise. More like a man who had been waiting so long he had started to think it would never come. Close the door, he said. Sit down. I closed it most of the way. I could hear Jean out on the floor setting cans on a shelf one at a time. Malik folded his hands and waited because he was never in a hurry. He just never stopped. The night of the storm, I did open that door, I said. It was not the storm. It was me. His body leaned forward about 2 inches. How? He said. One word, and the weight of it sat on the desk between us like something solid. I do not fully understand it myself, I said. But since the lightning hit me 4 years ago, sometimes I can make dead things turn on. Batteries, bulbs. That night I put my hands on the lock and pushed everything I had into it, and it opened. He did not say anything for a long time. His face was not angry, and it was not scared, and it was not the look people give you when they think you are crazy. It was a man standing at the edge of something deep, deciding whether to step forward or back. Then he let out a breath through his nose and leaned back. That is the craziest thing anyone has ever said to me in this office, he said, and I have heard some things. Then he opened the top right drawer and took out the silver flashlight, the dead one from the counter, and set it in the middle of the desk like he was placing a bet. Show me. My stomach clenched the way it does right before you jump off something high. I picked it up. Cool, light, ordinary. I closed my eyes and pushed, and the buzz rolled down my arm into the metal, and the thing fought me for a second the way dead things always do. Then the beam came on. Weak yellow at first. I pushed harder, and it went clean white, a bright circle on the ceiling tiles above his desk. Malik was not looking at the flashlight. He was looking at the light, his head tilted back, his face lit from below in a way that made him look 10 years older and 10 years younger at the same time. It held 3, maybe 4 seconds. Then I let go and it faded, and the office was just an office again. No nosebleed this time, just my hand shaking a little, like I had finally learned how much to give without breaking myself. How long? He asked. Since the hospital, I said. Since the scar. And you never told anyone. It was not a question. Because the second I tell someone, I stop being a person and start being a thing people want to study or use or run from, I said. I just want to stock shelves and go home. It came out easy, because it was the truest thing I had said out loud in 4 years. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that means a man is taking it in and giving it weight. My grandmother used to say lightning chooses people, he said, and his voice had gone soft at the edges. I thought she was old and superstitious. I do not think that anymore. Then he stood and pushed the door open, looked out at the dark aisles and the humming cases, and turned back to me. I am going to delete the footage, he said, and I am going to stop asking questions. His jaw tightened, like the next part cost him, like it went against everything he had built after being lied to once before. You saved Jean's life with whatever this is, and Jean is my friend, and that is enough for me. Something in my chest unclenched that had been clenched so long it had forgotten it was holding, but he held up one finger. I need one thing. If something like that ever happens again in my store, you tell me. Not the truth, not how. Just tell me it is handled. Can you do that? I can do that, I said. Then something moved in the doorway behind him. Jean was standing there with his hands at his sides, not pretending to stalk anything, and his face said he had heard every word of it. Malik's eyes narrowed a little, not in anger, just a second piece clicking in right behind the first. You knew, he said. Jean nodded. Since that night, Malik made a sound that was almost a laugh. The sound a man makes when he finds out he has been outplayed by people he thought he was ahead of and cannot even be angry about it, because the reason they did it was good. 2 grown men keeping a secret from me in my own store, he said. I really am getting old. Go home, both of you. I'll lock up. We walked out through the dark store past the registers and the camera with its little red light that would not matter after tonight. Jean unlocked the front door, and the rain came down light and warm, the kind that feels like the sky rinsing itself off after a long day. You did the right thing, Jean said. It was like I had been carrying a bag of rocks up a hill for 4 years, and somebody had finally told me I could set it down. Not forever, but for the night. I know, I said. Then the street light at the edge of the lot, the one that had been dark all evening, hummed once and came on, and our shadows stretched out long across the wet pavement in front of us. Jean stopped walking. He looked up at it, then at me, with that tired half smile of a man who has seen enough strange things in his life to make room for one more. That was you, wasn't it? He said. And I put my hands in my pockets and kept walking toward my car. Good night, Jean, I said. Behind me, the light stayed on.